Kristen, thank you so much for asking me to speak and inviting me back to 5D. My name's Mo. I'm an alcoholic. I currently live in Little Rock, Arkansas, by way of formerly Chicago, which is how I know Kristen. And I'm sure I'll touch on that, hopefully, 15, 20 minutes. Okay. Let's get through a few things first. My sobriety date is April 26th of 2006. I have a sponsor who's long distance, which I feel is very important to share in general, but especially in a meeting like this and in times like this. I also sponsor a woman long distance, and then I also sponsor a girl who lives just down the street. So, you know, all ends of the spectrum here. I don't have a home group. I was in the process of transitioning home groups when everything shut down. So I'm kind of in a weird limbo, which is weird. Like, I've only lived here for a couple of years. I have this sponsor that I've only had for a couple of months, and switching home groups. So, you know, if you're also in a weird limbo, right there with you. So those are kind of my stats, so to say. I first of all want to welcome all those who are new to this meeting. This meeting holds an incredibly special place in my heart. It was my home group for quite a long time, and my headphones might die here. So it holds just a very incredibly special place in my heart. And I started to get very overwhelmed and a little teary with everyone who is celebrating a day count and any range of anniversary. This is, to quote everyone, this is unprecedented times, and to be getting sober during this insanity is like, y'all are amazing. So please keep doing what you're doing and stick with it. And I promise it will get better. Not always, but it will get better and different, and then worse, and then better again, which is sobriety in life. So, all right, let's jump into it. Okay, so like I said, I'm originally from outside Chicago. There's a couple of things I just wanna touch on. One of my first memories, I don't know how old I was, but my parents had some friends coming over for dinner, and they rang the doorbell, and I ran behind the chair in the family room, and I hid there until dinner time. And so I was just a child filled with fear. And, you know, my parents knew these people. They were inviting them into our home, and I had a lot of fear. So I'm bringing a lot of fear to the table, you know, before I even start drinking. And I always wanted to fit in. I've always been a people pleaser. What do you want me to be? I will be it, and just fit that mold. So I'm bringing that to, you know, there's some alcoholism for you before I even started have a drink. And I had my first drink when I was 13. I was in 7th or 8th grade, which is terrifying because my stepson is just finishing 8th grade. It's just like terrifying to think back on, me being that age, but I'm going to go into some details here because this is important to my story. That we just like opened the fridge, trying to figure out what to drink, juice or this like white wine thing in a box. Gravitated towards the box, and it was disgusting. Like, absolutely. I don't know if any of you are boxed wine drinkers, but like, you don't drink it for the taste, right? Am I right? So, but it was awful. It tasted awful. But as soon as it went in, it warmed me from the inside out. And I hated how it tasted, but I wanted more. And so, you know, I learned how to cover the taste over my drinking, the course of my drinking. I learned how to cover the taste of the alcohol so that I could get the effect produced by it. And that was how I drank. That's because even though I wanted to be what I thought you wanted me to be. I also like didn't like that feeling. And so when I drank, I could just be anyone and feel like anything, and it was freeing. So I drank like that for a while, which, you know, as a teenager, it's difficult to drink like that, but we found ways. There was one other time I want to kind of highlight that I was a senior in high school, and my friends all had fake IDs, but I was too scared to have a fake ID because, again, I wanted to fit into this mold of what I thought you wanted me to be, which was like a good kid in my parents' eyes and in my teacher's eyes. But, you know, I'm getting drunk all the time. Okay, there it went. My earphones went out. So my friends all had fake IDs, but I didn't. So I gave them money to go buy for me one day, and there was some sort of accident. I don't know if it was on purpose or really an accident, and they broke my bottle that I paid for. And like we got in a fight over it because I didn't want to share. Like they said, we have plenty of other bottles, like it's fine, but I didn't want to share. I didn't want to share at all. I needed the reassurance that I had my own stash to get as drunk as I wanted and needed. So, you know, these are some of the things that I'm bringing into my alcoholism: a lot of fear, a lot of people pleasing, a lot of anger, a lot of selfishness. And so I got through high school, I graduated, and I'm the oldest in my family. So my family was dropping me off at college, and I found out about this party like off campus that night. And my parents had wanted to kind of like see me off, you know, that I'm their oldest. And they just wanted to make sure I was okay. And I heard about this party where I could pay $5 and get all the booze I wanted all night. And so I said, see ya, to my parents. I had no more use for them. I was like, you got me here. Thank you. Goodbye. And I went to that party and drank as much as I wanted. And it was a mess, as most of my drinking from there on out was. But like one thing, when I read Bill's story, there's a line where it said, I had arrived. And that's how I felt when I found like that drinking culture of the red solo cup parties. I felt like I had arrived. And that college was my vehicle for that. I went in with a scholarship. I quickly lost that because as my drinking increased, my grades decreased. And my weekends began to expand from Friday, Saturday to Thursday, Friday, you know, and then like wrap around on Sunday because you're hungover, so hair of the dog. And, you know, but there's a great bar on Wednesday with a lot of great deals. So we'll start on Wednesday. I'll, you know, nurse the hangover on Sunday with a few beverages. You know, Tuesdays that Corby's, that's a great bar too. You know, so I eventually, by the time I'm a senior in college, I have a different bar for every night of the week, different crowd of people, different specials, whatever. I was paying full price. Let's be honest. It wasn't about the specials. And I was a mess, and I wasn't going to school. I wasn't showing up to work. When I was showing up to work, I was showing up drunk. I remember I had a really early morning. I had to show up to work really early on a Saturday. Yeah, I think on a Saturday. And I, of course, went out the night before. I was only going to drink a little. And I walked in. I got home, I changed clothes, I showered, and I walked in, and they said, did you go out last night? And I was like, well, yeah. And they said that I still smelled like the bar. It was probably just oozing from my pores at that point, you know, probably still drunk. And just disgusting, really. I hadn't thought about that in a while. It's just really gross. And it got to a point where I was 22 years old, and I was incredibly depressed. The only times I would leave the house were at night after I'd started drinking. And I get really sad when I go back there because, like when I mentally go back there, because it was just such like it was a really sad existence that I was 22 years old and I didn't know how to live the rest of my life. I didn't know how to do that without drinking and without being so miserable. And I saw people out in the world and they seemed not so miserable. And I was 22 and I knew that I had like a lot of life to live, but I was miserable. So long story short, I asked for help, and like I had that moment of clarity. And as soon as that happened, where I asked for help and then help started flooding in, I wanted to backpedal. I was like, whoa, no. I don't need to go to outpatient. I don't need to leave school. I don't need to go to outpatient. I don't need to go to AA. Like I just drink a little too much and I'm failing school. Can we can we get rid of the F's? Right? Like I almost wanted to like work my way around things. So I go to outpatient and I thought, so I'm from a pretty small town. I went to a pretty standard college, and I thought that I was the only young person in the history of the world to get sober, because like I was 22, I was a senior in college. Who stops drinking at that time? I mean, like, or ever was my thinking. And I thought I was going to be resigned to a life, like going to meetings with my parents' peers and like having dinner with them and watching the news at 6 o'clock and then like calling it a night, which actually I like do now. But I really thought that was going to be my life, and I was miserable. And so I walk into treatment, and there's another girl who's 21 who'd also just left college, and immediately that uniqueness was just crushed in the best of ways. And so I tell that story because if you're like me and you think that like you're totally different, just try to tune in for any sort of similarity, not necessarily with me, but like go to another meeting and try to hear something, because I promise you, and it'll probably come from the most outrageous spot, but like we're all very similar. We're all very similar. So I then want to be like the best AA, because that people pleasing and like wanting to fit the mold didn't go away. And so I like was a very good outpatient student. I did all my work and I went to all the meetings and got everything signed. I don't know, air quoting. I got them signed. But the great thing about that is I was introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I can tell you the long and short of it is that AA has not only saved my life, but has given me the life that I have today, which is absolutely incredible. I have a 2-year-old, an almost 2-year-old. He'll be 2 in like a couple weeks, and he is a handful, but he's just like the best. And like I'm a mom, I keep this child alive, right? Like I can barely keep myself going, and I keep this little person alive. And I'm a wife, and I have a stepson, and I live in Arkansas. So I say all those things because I want to like go real quick through some of the big life stuff that got me here. Because let me tell you first that I've been through, my fair share of relationships, and they prepared me to be a wife and to be the partner that I am today, that I was not always fit to be a partner, and like I made a move, which is, if you've ever moved, as scary as shoot. I don't know if I should swear here or not, but like it's scary, right? Okay. Real quick. Let's just do a few minutes of some highlights. So I did my first move when I was about 2 years sober. I moved from the suburbs of Chicago to the big bad city of Chicago, which may not seem like that big of a difference or a deal, but they're like worlds different. and the AA is totally different, and the young people are totally different, and the meetings are totally different. And it was only 45 minutes from my parents where I got sober, but it was this whole big, expansive amazingness, and it was really hard because everything was different. Also, if you have ever moved or if you intend to ever move, where you got sober will always hold a special place in your heart, and they'll probably always do AA the best there. I don't know if you've moved, you like get it, but I've moved a few times and they still always do AA best back home, but I've come to appreciate the way that AA is done everywhere. So that's the little difference there. But anyway, I moved and I was introduced to all these young people, and they told me that they were doing this thing. They were bidding for this crazy thing called ICYPA, which is the International Conference of Young People in AA. And I was like, okay, I don't know what that is. I've never been to it, but I like doing business stuff, so sure, I'll join your committee. And they wanted to spend all this money on QuickBooks, and I was like, but you don't have that money. And then they didn't like me because I spoke up, but they really didn't have the money. And so, you know, if you go to a business meeting and you're new, don't be afraid to speak up. I promise it's good. I stayed with that committee for the next 9 years, so they grew to love me. Where else are we going with this? Shortly after I moved, I got fired, so I was unemployed, which was very scary. If you've ever been unemployed in sobriety or outside of sobriety, it's very terrifying. But Alcoholics Anonymous is always there, and it's an incredible network of people who have also been unemployed or been through life shit and life stuff, and like how to stay sober through it and how to walk through it like with grace. It's not always pretty, but I learned. I've been unemployed twice or 3 times. I got fired once in sobriety. That's really humbling. I was 10 years sober and I got fired because I lied to my boss. Sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, I lied to my boss and I lost my job. And for a long time I told people that I got laid off, some fancy terminology, but I had to come to terms with it. Like, I wasn't treating my job as if my higher power was my employer. I was like treating it like the man was my employer, you know? And so I was mad and I was resentful, and I started holding these dark secrets and lying, and yeah, I'm gonna get fired because I'm a piece of crud, you know? So that happened, and now when I look at work, I try to look at it as like, how am I being of service to these people? They may be paying me, sure, but like, how am I being of service to them? Because I've learned that in Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I got sober, I hadn't finished school. So during one of my bouts of unemployment, I was hitting all these roadblocks with jobs, and I realized that something inside of me was actually holding me back, and that I wanted to go back to school and finish my bachelor's. And so I went back to the school that I hit the town where I hit my bottom, and to the school that I essentially drank my way out of. And I applied everything that I'd learned in Alcoholics Anonymous to that experience. I sat in the front because you guys told me to sit in the front so that I wouldn't be distracted by everything going on. So I sat in the front. I used my professors as if they were my sponsors. They were my sponsors for those subjects, you know. I went to their office hours as if that was my meeting with them, you know, like I meet with my sponsor once a week at a given time. So I went to their office hours at that given time. And I asked them questions, and we went through material just like I do in AA, you know, and I participated in my classmates because this is a fellowship, right? I had a fellowship in my classes just like we have a fellowship here. And I did my work because my sponsors always ragged on me to do my work. And they said, you'll feel better when you do your work. So I did my schoolwork, and then I graduated. It was wild. And along that road was my second move. Yeah, so my second move back, and I was really lonely. I had returned to this town, and I was now a unconventional student or whatever, and I was sober in this like drinking town. And I had my journey to my relationship with my higher power, because I was mad. I didn't want to be there. All my friends, my entire life was in Chicago, and it was just me and God. I call my higher power different now, but like at the time it was God. And like we would get in fights, y'all. Like I lived alone, and I would talk out loud, and I would like yell, and I worry what my neighbors thought. But God and I were going through some shit, you know. And I can tell you that after I left that experience, like I knew that I was going to be okay, because I had this relationship with a higher power. And it's just like any relationship where it's not always perfect, but like, what am I putting into it? What am I putting into it? Because that's probably what I'm going to get back. And so that's, you know, and I was a few years sober, and that's like really where the root of my spiritual experience started to take place. And man, it was beautiful and wonderful. And okay, just a couple more. Am I done, or do I have like a couple more minutes? Couple more? Two? Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, great. So I'm going to speed through this because I moved back to Chicago. We eventually hosted IKIPA, which was the most wild service position I've ever been a part of. Hosting a conference of any sort is an incredible feat and beautiful service that will bring a committee together, because you really have to work through things. And it taught me how to also work with non-alcoholics, right? Like that's one of the beauties of committee work, is you get to learn how to work with people and then like remain civil and or even friends. Amazing. And we host the year we were awarded IKIPA was in Nashville. It was 2016. And I'd seen this guy a couple months prior, but he like came up, and I don't know, I was being all weird and awkward, and so we got awarded. And a couple months later, I came down to Arkansas for this thing called ArkIPA, which is a camping conference. It's amazing. Shout out, come down to ArkIPA. It's beautiful. Okay. And I saw this guy again, and he was like, "What are you doing here?" And I thought he was mad at me. Like I thought I'd done something, or like I wasn't supposed to be there or something. And I was like, "I'm at ArkIPA," and I was just wild. And we just talked like the rest of that day, and then we kept talking, and he's my husband now. And so I moved to Little Rock. Well, we dated long distance for a year, which was very unalcoholic of us, to like keep our space and do all that. So now I live in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I don't know, life's a whole lot different. It's still like, I'm a mom of a toddler, so I'm tired. Like I'm tired right now, y'all. I'm not on my A game, because I'm in bed, but I want to be like under the covers in bed. This is late for me. It's like I'm tired. So like my meetings aren't like they used to be. I'm not going to like 3-4 meetings a week. I'm hitting 1-2, and that's like great for me. And that's okay. That's where I'm at right now. And if you need to hit multiple meetings a day, like that's awesome. That's where you're at right now too, you know? And so because I'm in it now, I have like a lot more grace for people who are we're all just doing the best we can. And especially in these times, which are, I'm going to swear, but like they're so fucking wild. There's really no other phrasing for it. Like this is wild what we're in right now. And so y'all are doing the best you can, and I love you for it. And just please keep doing the best you can. And 5D will always be here, and hopefully you can get to any physical meetings, like if that's your jam too. So I'm, again, just so grateful for 5D. And yeah, I will close so we can hear